Welcome. My name is Atoma. So excited you're able to join our YouTube channel today. We have a very awesome guest with us, which is Rob Skinner, who is the evangelist in the Tucson church. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Mr. Rob, about how you became a disciple and how things are going in Tucson?
I became a Christian in 1986, April 4th of 86. And I was going to school at UC Berkeley. I was a junior there. And I was in a lot of sin, a lot of wild living. And God placed a disciple living right next door to me in the dorms. His name was Kurt. And on one particularly bad weekend, I just woke up thinking, I really got to make a change here. And he had been inviting me to a Bible discussion that I'd gone to the previous fall semester a couple times. But at that point, I had a nightmare that I was trapped in hell. And it scared me. It really put the fear of God in me. And I thought, I wonder if I'm really going to make it. And at the same time, I was a member of a hang gliding club. And out of the group of 12 that we were training together, 2 of them had major injuries in our training program. Both of them crashed right in front of me, and they were severely injured. And so it made me really think about, okay, if I were to crash, what would happen to me? And so at that point, I really sobered up and started studying the Bible and got baptized that April.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I know we'll talk a little bit more about the Tucson church, so we'll get to that. But I know you wrote a book recently. It's your second book. The title is Courage, How to Make This Life Count. What's the book all about?
Well, my first book was how to plant and grow a church. I originally called it 0 to 100, but changed the name recently to How to Plant and Grow a Church. And that was geared for small church leaders, planters, which is a very narrow segment of the Christian population. And one thing that I saw in my life and in other lives of mature disciples, as I get into my 40s, 50s, and I'm almost turning 55 next month, Jesus said the love of most will grow cold. And it's easy to get sucked into a very complacent lifestyle as a disciple, especially in the West, where there's so much comfort, so much pleasure that's accessible and anonymous and affordable. And I wanted to write a book that would call the average disciple who's maybe 5, 10, 15 years old as a disciple or even longer to live the kind of radical life that they originally intended to. And if we're ever going to make a difference in this world, it's going to happen with courageous disciples. You got to have courage. And so I had done a retreat for the Los Angeles church, the Santa Clarita region in LA on courage. And so I took those notes and expanded it because I thought it was super appropriate for where many, many disciples are at that are my age, who became Christians in the 80s or the 90s in particular. So that's what it was, is to try to encourage and to spur any disciple, whether they're a leader or not, to live a courageous and bold life.
Yeah, I think you mentioned also at one point that courage is the almost chief virtue. I forget the exact term.
That's
that
right.
Allows you to...
The indispensable quality.
Correct. That's
yes.
Awesome. That's awesome. So I know your goal right now, you've written 2 books, and I think your goal is to write a book a year, which I think is awesome. And I think I know a little bit about you. They seem like a very disciplined, get things done kind of guy. So I think you definitely will achieve that. But what inspired you to set the goal of writing a book a year?
Well, again, I figure I probably got 10 more years before I turn 65. And if I choose to retire at that time, I think, okay, how can I make the biggest difference with the remainder of this life? How can I make this life count? It's really important to me. I know I do a podcast. I talk a little bit about making this life count, but a lot of that stems from, I feel a real sense of the shortness of time, how brief this life is. I just celebrated my 30th anniversary, and I go, okay, how can I make the biggest difference? And one of the things that inspired me early on as a Christian is I wanted to be like Paul. I wanted to live like him. He was a church planter. He's a preacher, and he also wrote. I mean, his writing changed history, and through the letters that he wrote. And so when I got my master's in biblical studies in the early 2000s, one of the benefits, and I think probably the largest benefit of that master's program, was not necessarily the knowledge or the study that I got out of it, although that was good, but it was the confidence that after writing all those papers, many, many 20-page papers, when I looked at the completed amount of papers I wrote, I thought, that's like a book. I've like written a book through this master's program. And it gave me the confidence I can write a book. So from that, I just thought, okay, next 10 years, I'm going to just try to write a book a year and just share it. And I think part of it too is like, I've been fearful of letting people know what I really think. And it's a good exercise for me to not have any regrets, speak my mind. And so that's where that's coming from. I did it once. I thought it was awesome. It was on my bucket list. And then I had something else I wanted to write. And I thought, there's a few more things I want to write. And so I enjoy it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I still need to read your book. I know it just came out on courage, but I really loved 0 to 100. That's just
Thank you.
Incredible book, including the practicals, because I know you did. I think that's a compilation in some senses of lessons that you did for the ACR region with Ed Anton. I think you did a 6-part series, and then how to effectively build a church, something like that. And then to put that into a book, I just loved it. I just loved it.
Thank you.
How do you find time to research and write? I know there are a lot of people that would love to write, and they're like, man, I just don't have the time. So how do you get the time or make the time to write and get these things done?
That's a great question. There are 2 books that have really helped me. One of them is Anne Lamott's book called Bird by Bird. The other book is called The War of Art. Not the art of war, but the war of art. And it talks about resistance and how we, in accomplishing anything, especially when writing, there's resistance. We'll do anything. We'll look on Facebook, we'll mess around, procrastinate before we want to sit down and actually write. And so those books definitely help me to realize, okay, if I'm ever going to write anything, I'm gonna have to force myself to do it. And so what I did with the first book was, it was a June of 2018. It's very hot here in Tucson. It's a little quieter in the church calendar because school's out. And what I did was, for a month, I gave myself 30 days. And first thing I did when I woke up is I had a short quiet time and forced myself to write for 3 45-minute segments. And again, this is something I learned from my master's program, is I do the best when I work for 45 to 50 minutes at a pop, and then allow myself to read a motorcycle magazine or take a walk or use the restroom or whatever, and just take a break. I call that 1 hour. If it's 45 minutes, that's 1 hour. But I have a little timer that I use. You can see that I've been using this right here. And I've got a little leg timer. And I carry this with me when I speak, when I write, and I just hit the button and I put it on my desk, and I tell myself, you can't do anything else until that dinger goes off, and then you can relax and do anything. And so the most important thing for me is treating it like a part-time job, and imagining that I have a part-time job as a writer, and delaying everything else until afterwards, and realizing, okay, ministry, everything else, I can make phone calls in the breaks, but other than that, it has to happen afterwards. So early in the morning when I'm fresh, it's very difficult for me to write in the afternoon. I get very tired, and my best thoughts come in the morning. So just forcing myself, as well as little tricks like telling myself, don't worry about how bad it is. Just put it down. Just write it, and you can edit it later. That helps me. Just type. Just type. Don't worry about it. That helps. Now, I do think that being in the ministry also helps because I have more control over my time. That's the benefit of being in the ministry. So
You did the same kind of process for your second book?
exactly.
In a month okay.
I give myself 30 days.
Okay.
I work better with deadlines, and I just say, okay. And I record every day how many words I wrote, and I try to get 1,500 words written every day. And I try to write a book that's between about 30 and 40,000 words. And
That's
so
awesome.
just try to plug away at it, just go after it and get it done. So that helps me to work under a time constraint and force myself to get it done.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about your author life. I want to talk a little bit now about church and ministry life, if you will. So I know obviously you're in Tucson. As I mentioned, I had a chance to visit Tucson, although we weren't able to hook up just through some craziness, last year. But I wanted to just find out how things are going for you guys in the age of COVID.
That's a good question. Well, one of the things that I'm seeing is it's very disorienting as a leader because I worry about how people are doing. I think about what Paul said, daily I feel the pressure of my concern for all the churches. So I try to call around a lot, try to stay connected with people. And one thing that I've been trying to do most recently is just moving towards a house church style format. Like I have the people in my household, plus we've added a few other people, and we're worshiping together on Sundays with a small group. And I'm encouraging other people who are willing to meet and to have food. And basically I'm essentially redoing what I did when I moved to Ashland, Oregon, and planted a church in my living room. And so this is something I'm super familiar with. I'm super comfortable with, is starting a church in my living room. And so I'm going to be teaching this fall on how to build a house church, how to build a church in your home. And I think that's one of the things that God's teaching me through this time is like, okay, if we're going to advance the kingdom, it's going to happen through small house churches and small groups.
Okay, cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I know right now there's been a lot of racial tension in the United States, sparked by the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I just want to know how you guys are doing as far as addressing racial tension, cultural issues, just to bring unity and these kinds of things.
When that happened, I had to just, we have a core group or a overseers group or a shepherding group that is very diverse, and which helps because we have a very small church of about 130 people. Tucson itself is about the demographics. It's about 35 to 40% Latino, and 4 to 5% of the population is African American. So it doesn't have a big population of African Americans, but the population of the church is more like 10% African American. And so in our leadership group, we have Latinos, whites, and we have one Black brother. His name's Pernell Parker. And so it's a group of, 5 couples. And so just working with them, trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to tackle this? How are we going to approach this? And I just had to call around. I was just like, okay, how do I approach this? Like, what am I going to do to handle this sensitively, comprehensively, in a way that is godly and spiritual without being reactionary and alienating people from different backgrounds within our congregation? So I called people like Hervé Florent, talked to him, and other friends as well, just to share their perspective. And one thing that Herb H said, he said, hey, you need to watch that video. He said, have you watched that video? And I hadn't. I had heard about it, and it just seemed so brutal. I didn't want to watch it. But I did, sat down with Pam, and we just watched it. And he said, just watch it, and then just share what your feelings are after watching that. And so it took me a couple of weeks to kind of put together my thoughts, and then just address the congregation. I mean, there are some people like, hey, how come Rob's not talking about this faster? But I was afraid about speaking too quickly and coming across as either insincere or out of touch. So after that, after I spoke to the church and did a lesson from the Bible on that issue, we had several midweeks where we just had people share what their experience was as an African American, and people could ask questions. And so that's how we approached it. There are some people that felt like it was fine. It was handled well. Others felt like it wasn't handled, or we didn't go far enough, and so, but at this point, that's where we left it.
Mm-hmm. Have you read any of Mike Burns's books? I know he has some pretty good books on.
I haven't, no.
Yeah,
I have one. I just got one called The Beast or something like that.
Escaping the Beast. Very good book. Very good book. I think you'll really love it, because it really pulls everything together. It's just us be the kingdom and really view each other as image bearers. So great book.
Right.
So I know one of the things you do also is work with small churches to bring them together once a month to really just encourage and inspire through webcasts and so forth. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, last year we had a small church leaders conference, and we called it Look Up. When God talked to Abraham after giving Lot the land of Sodom and that area, he told Abraham, hey, look up to the north, to the south. I'm going to give you all this land. And we called that conference the Look Up Conference to encourage small church leaders and give them tools because we felt like it was something that would really help kind of a segment of our leadership group that hadn't gotten a lot of attention. So I thought that was a great conference. We held it in Wisconsin. Joel Peed was the one who asked me to be a part of it originally. And then I got another call this summer because we were hoping to have a follow-up conference early this coming year. But with COVID, that really changed things. And I was talking to Glenn Petruzzi, who leads the church in Portland, Maine. And he said, you should have a webinar every month to follow up with that conference. And I thought that's a great idea. And so every month on the fourth Thursday, I believe, of the month, or Friday, we get together. Like last month, I taught a class on keeping your head in all situations, 2 Timothy 4:5, about just keeping your head in every situation. And then this month, Joel Nagel did a class. And so what's really cool is that we've got leaders from all around the world showing up for that webinar. And to see that on Zoom, and then there's Q&A time, there's discussion groups. It's very uniting. It's pretty awesome to see people from India and from the Philippines and from Africa, all over the place. So it's really turned out to be awesome.
That's great. That's great. So with everything going on, I mean, what do you and your wife do for fun these days?
That's a good question. Okay, you know what? Okay, on TV, what I've been hooked on is this TV show called Alone. And they drop off 10 people up in the Arctic and leave them there. And the last person standing can win $500,000. And I just love it because they get some basic safety equipment, plus they can choose 10 tools to take with them into the Arctic. And it's just awesome to see how these people are so creative and come up with ways to try to make it. And it makes me think about, there's so many spiritual parallels, because like when Paul talks about put on the full armor of God, he's basically saying, make sure you take the right tools with you into this world, because you don't know everything you're going to face, but if you have the right tools in general, you're going to be way, way better off. And so the people that have the right tools, like an axe, a saw, sleeping bag, maybe a fishing net to catch fish or fishing line. They do a lot better. And so I've really enjoyed that. I've just gotten into it, and that's what we've been doing for fun.
Do you do like any Zoom dates with other couples or social distance dates or?
No, but I just one thing I did this month. It's our 30th anniversary, and I took my wife away for a week, and we went over to La Jolla, which is in San Diego, and I just went surfing for a week straight. Just hit the beach, and I love to surf, and I just surfed. Not a great surfer, but I did it every day for a week. That was really fun. Pam loves to go on the beach and just sit there, take walks, and we had a great time.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We definitely need that. So far we've talked about your author life, which is very inspiring. I am also someone who is putting my first book together and want to have a bunch of books that I put out. We've talked about church and ministry and a little bit about the fun that you're trying to have in the new age. I want to discuss a little bit about the podcast that you have and also about the movement just in general. Okay. Got it. So can you tell us a little bit about the podcast that you started, why you started it, and what you're hoping to achieve through it?
Yeah, I don't know the origin of the idea of where I came up with a podcast. I wish I'd like written it down, but I don't know. But I just felt like, okay, one of the things with the conference for small church leaders, I felt like this is my area of expertise. This is what I'm good at. What I've done as a minister with my career is leading small churches, planting small churches. And it was very gratifying to help people. And so there's a couple things that were driving it. One is I felt like I want to keep growing and learning personally. And I want to learn from other people that are growing around the world, because there's just amazing people on every continent that are just doing amazing things. So personally, I thought this would be like having a great D time with different people to learn from them. But on the other hand, it also benefits other people who want to grow and make a difference with their lives by hearing people's stories. And one of the things I love about the ministry and what I've loved from the very beginning is I love to study the Bible with people, because every person's story is so interesting. Every person I study the Bible with, I'm amazed. I just go, wow, that's an incredible story. People always have something interesting going on in their life. So it just seemed like a confluence of my skill set, my interests, plus a need in the kingdom for inspiration that drove the podcast. And also with the COVID, I wanted to encourage my own church by offering inspiration from around the world.
How's it coming along? What's been your response? How many episodes have you had so far? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. We've had 33 episodes come out in the past 3 months. I think we're approaching 9,000 downloads. And so it's been great. We're just averaging about, I'd probably say 100 downloads per day, people listening to it. So that makes me really happy. I'm just very happy, and lots of really good feedback. I wanted it to be directed especially to younger people, maybe between 20 and 35, people that want to make a difference in their life and want inspiration, want help. And so, yeah, I'm super pleased with how things are going. And what's nice about it is, even if I don't get any responses from anybody else, I'm personally benefiting so much by making relationships and learning what other people are doing. It's very humbling, challenging, and inspiring for me.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So I don't want to get you in any trouble by saying who necessarily your favorite guest is, but can you share maybe what are some of the guests or conversations that have most impacted you?
Yeah, I think some of they're all fantastic people. I mean, I haven't had any disappointments in any one of them. I think one that has probably had the greatest viewership has been the interview with Lynn Green. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, probably 10% of all the downloads have just been that one interview. And she was so real, so raw, so vulnerable, very impacting to me about her talking about the power of Bible talks in every culture, whether in Seattle, Boston, Hong Kong, or Japan. Every place she's went, small discussions, small group discussions. I thought, I really want to emphasize that here in Tucson. I want to have house churches and small groups and train people on the lost art of leading a evangelistic Bible discussion. I think Sean Wooten's episode was so inspiring to me. I feel like kind of like a kinship with him, his passion for ministry, what he's doing and planning a church in Budapest, Hungary. I just like his attitude about taking the kingdom and going from 100,000 to 1 million. So that very much inspired me. After talking to him, he talked about his fasting life, his prayer and fasting. The next week after that, I went on a 7-day water fast just because I was so convicted to talk to him. I was like, when's the last time I really did a hard fast? And so it really helped me spiritually. I really like Mike Fontenot's, I like different themes from each person. Mike Fontenot, his attitude, like, I'm just going to do it the way I feel like God's called me to do it. Very self-confident, just like, hey, this is the way I believe God's called me to do it, and I'm going to do it this way. And I like that attitude. Yeah, those are some of the highlights, although I thought all of them are fantastic.
So my next question was, what churches or ministries inspire you the most? So I think definitely Mike Fontenot, I think, is one that you've mentioned. Are there some other 2 or 3 ministries that really inspire you?
Well, Tom Brown's work in Georgia on the campus ministry is amazing. They've got a campus ministry of over 200 on campuses that I would consider not the most ideal for campus ministry. Kennesaw State, Georgia Tech. I mean, they're great schools, but they're not like University of Florida or, massive big schools. And yet Tom Brown, at the age of 70, has taken that church from, I don't know, a few hundred to way over 1,000 disciples in the church and over 200 in the campus ministry. And I go, he's a real inspiration to me. And I've been working hard to try to interview him. He's hard to reach. He hasn't gotten back to me yet. That ministry certainly inspired me. I like what Tony Fernandez is doing in the Broward County Church in terms of arts. I mean, he's kind of like a Stephen Furtick type person, he's like artsy, and he's pretty impressive in that way. But yeah, those are 2 that definitely stand out to me.
So I know the other one I mentioned Fontenot, but what inspires you about Mike Fontenot's ministry?
Well, the thing that inspires me about Mike is not only his church in Sydney, which has grown, but all the plantings he's sent out, they're multiplying. Churches in New Zealand, led by Dave Bliley, that church has gone from like 50 to 150 disciples in the last few years. A guy named Sam Cameron over in Perth has taken his church, it's multiplying. So he's not just growing his church, but he's got an attitude like he's going to multiply churches and leaders, which, when I hear that kind of stuff, that's what I want to do. I want to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches, and that's what he's doing. So it's one thing to be able to do it in your church, but can you multiply what you can do? And that's the challenge I feel for me is, yeah, I can plant a church and make it grow. Can I train somebody else to do that? I think that's my next test.
Mm-hmm. I think you mentioned on your podcast that you're trying to plant 10 churches in the next 10 years or something to that effect.
That's right. Yeah.
That's still a goal of yours, or what's
that's
I know we're
still my goal.
Okay. That's awesome. So if you had the power to make any changes in our family of churches, and I guess maybe to put it another way, what would you say is our most important need from your perspective?
I thought about that question when you wrote it down, and I love that question because it really makes me boil down, okay, what does the kingdom need right now? And I think with COVID, one thing I've thought about is our methodology has been challenged, because all of a sudden our methodology we can't meet together, we're limited in different ways. So we're having to change our methods. But our principles, our underlying principles, that's what we're going to have to really take a look at, like our prayer lives, our fasting lives, our spiritual disciplines, our focus on evangelism. That's what we're going to have to really resurrect and figure out what works in every situation. Prayer works in every situation. And one of the things that over the course of this past year, I've felt the most strongly is we have to get back to principles that worked 50 years ago in the kind of the beginning of the campus ministry movement. And don't do it exactly the same way, but we have to make sure that we're not just paying lip service to those things, but we're taking them higher. For example, Bible talks, like I mentioned, small group discussions, evangelistic discussions. One thing that I'm really trying to work on now is from the master plan of evangelism, the concept that Jesus won the world by training people, putting time into a few people. So one thing I'm experimenting with, Atoma, is I've got a couple new guys that one guy I've hired, one just moved here to train in ministry. And I'm trying to give them an hour every single day of discipling and prayer time. So they come over at 8 a.m, we go for a walk and just talk for an hour. And like I took them away for a 2-day spiritual retreat and spent 48 hours together. And I think it's like we know that we should disciple, but knowing and actually doing are two different things. And so when COVID hit, I thought, okay, I'm going to go back and really try to raise up an evangelist in a year. And so I'm expecting that that's probably going to be one of my books, The 1 Year Evangelist, and I'm going to see how it goes. So I'm trying to use this time to experiment with going back to the things that are difficult to do. They may not be new, but they're difficult. Fasting, more prayer, putting time into a few people, having really effective small groups and small Bible talks. And I feel like if I were in charge of the kingdom and I could just mandate and say, hey, we need to do this, although that's never going to happen, is I would really call people back to that.
Back to Bible talks, and that's essentially.
Yeah, Bible talks, but also deep prayer, deep spirituality.
Got it. All those elements. Okay. Thank you. Well, I definitely appreciate your time. And I guess just to be specific, your podcast is called the Rob Skinner Podcast, correct?
Yes.
If anyone wants to look it up. And what I'll do is I'll put that in the show notes. I'll also link your church so people can listen to your lessons. Now, the once a month web cast or what have you for the small group, the smaller churches, how can people find out about that?
Right, and that's open to any small, if you're leading a small ministry or you want to join, just learn, it's open to everybody. You can go to Disciples Today, and it's advertised every month, or you can email me, rob@TucsonChurchofChrist.org. You can just email me. I'd be glad to send the link. But yeah, and you can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. But yeah, and then the books are on Amazon.
Well, I hope your podcast keeps growing. I love what you do. I feel even though we're at a distance in different ways, I just love your spirit. So definitely keep cranking.
Thank you.
I think for those that were I think for those who are able to join us, definitely if you enjoyed this episode, please click like and consider subscribing. Thanks so much for your time.